Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. So I remember back when we all learned about the Lucent Hive for the first time, we all sat there and wondered how the light could have been stolen, and there was a little in-character anger at the Hive for that theft. Turns out that we now know it wasn't theft at all, and characters in Destiny's universe on the side of the city and the Guardians are all pretty conflicted and shocked about the whole state of affairs. Regardless, characters such as Zavala and Lord Saladin keep a strong running hatred for the Lucent Hive. This hatred is, however, absolutely nothing compared to the hatred that the Lucent Hive have received at the hands of their own brothers and sisters. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about that newly emerging rivalry, but also the implications of where it might take the Hive as a species and what it really means. Societally, this is unquestionably a great schism, the likes of which has never been witnessed before by the Hive, but naturally it also potentially points the Hive towards a path by which they will be thrown into turmoil and will be forced to rediscover their purpose in the universe. The Great Schism is clear. The brood of one sister against the brood of another. Savathun against Xivu Arath, and by extension, the light versus the darkness. To put the depth of this division in perspective, even before Savathun claimed the light, there were former members of her brood that sloughed away their old armor in disgust and threw themselves fervently into service for Xivu Arath. Hive champions such as Kelgarath, risen from bones, who we faced several times back in the Season of the Lost, represent how the conflict that the Hive have currently found themselves embroiled in was already pronounced. And then, Savathun's brood did what the Hive would think to be the unthinkable. They had not only rejected the Witness, but they had also allied themselves with its immortal enemy, the Traveller, and claimed the power of its light. The consequences for these Lucent Hive, should they be caught by their loyalist counterparts, is demonstrated in the lore. The tusked Allegiance Helm talks about the fate of a Hive Guardian called Soktol, Fifth of the Light, who is presumably one of the more powerful Hive Guardians given their title. Soktol was captured and detained by other Hive that seemingly worshipped at the feet of Xivu Arath. The final result of his ordeal is not known, but the cruelty he endured is at least partially documented. The lore entry in question reads as follows. Again. Soktol, Fifth of the Light, felt flames surge through his body as he was resurrected. He became aware of many things at once. The altar beneath him, the roaring acolytes, the powerful grip on his shoulders, which even now began to crack under the pressure. Above him, a trio of wizards held his ghost, its bleached shell ensnared by ebony tendrils of controlling spellcraft. It pulled against the bonds, but could do nothing but look down at him helplessly. Sing of her lies. Speak of her truths. The voice was everywhere. As Soktol strained to sit up, something slammed him down, pounding his chitinous skull into the stone again and again. He screeched as the bony frill surrounding his face splintered and snapped loose. He felt his jaw dislodge, felt his own teeth crush against his face, felt himself crack and shatter. Blackness. And then... again. As his shell knit and restored, soul fire flowed anew. Soktol, Fifth of the Light, shuddered awake. The acolytes roared again. They crowded the altar, surrounded by a haze of green. Soktol peered upward at the ogre, pinning him against the altar. It tightened its grip on his shoulders, claws cracking with wrathful energy. It shook its massive head, crowned by an emerald corona, and bellowed in a voice that was not its own. Your strength becomes mine, as will hers. Speak! Soktol concentrated the light in his armored hand and began to form a grenade, but the shrieking acolytes reached forward and tore his fingers apart in their claws. Soktol bared his teeth and hissed up at the ogre, whose eyes rolled with fury as a blast of soulfire erupted from its mouth. Sokdol opened his jaws to howl as he was obliterated. Blackness. And then... again. Sokdol's treatment at the hands of Xivu-Arath's brood is a testament to the furious rift that has been formed between the Hive. But what are the implications of such a rift? Well, I think the answer to that question is dependent on a few factors. Most subtly of all, perhaps, and the first thing I want to discuss, I think it's important to ask what it is that specifically drives the actions of Xivu-Arath's brood, emotionally speaking. Needless to say, there is their duty to the witness and their adversary to the traveller and Savathun's brood, but I think the real question is whether it is more driven by rage or by fear. If the actions they undertake are driven by rage, then I think it fair to say that these Hive aren't for turning. There is no negotiating with them, and there is no way that they will be negotiated with, and I think the chances of that are fairly high. But maybe not complete. If these Hive acted with a sense of fear, then we need to unpack that a little bit more. An unsettled Hive is potentially one that starts asking questions. If there's even a little fear, or even just a little apprehension behind the mass of scything claws and razor teeth that makes up the swarm, I think this is a fear that is born out of the knowledge that their place in the universe is not as guaranteed as it once was. The Hive were once a people that knew nothing, knew no place within the universe, and believed themselves to be the smallest creatures within it. Then they consulted with the Witness and its emissary, and claimed the powers of darkness. Suddenly, they could fill to a position where they were powerful, and they were in command of their own destinies. Now, it's not so clear, and it's unclear because the Traveller also offers them a choice. Now there is the possibility of different futures regardless of the perceived outcomes of those futures, and I'm sure this is something that would unsettle a people that was before so set in its ways and so staunch in its belief as to be inseparable from those beliefs. To believe that the darkness was their future and their reason for being is a powerful thing, but when such a pillar is toppled and challenged, it is very easy to see how one might be unsettled by such a thing. I make this point because if Xivu-Arath or some of her other ascendants are beginning to see what has happened with Savathun's brood, then it's possible that she's starting to ask these very questions. These questions are exactly the thing that led Savathun to question if her place should actually be at the Witness's side. It's not impossible that if Xivu and her brood are confronted with such realities, they might come to similar conclusions. Once again, I'm led back to that oh-so-common question of whether Xivu-Arath is likely to change her ways. Once again, I think it's worth wondering if there's any way that she might also learn the truth of the Witness's manipulations and lies. It is the persistent question that perhaps governs the fate of the entirety of the Hive species. But it is not the only concern that one has to consider when it comes to the Hive loyalists and their vendetta against the Lucent Hive. If the Hive Guardians, like Sokdol, are being found in the captive grasp of Xivu-Arath's Hive brood, then it's entirely possible that they are either being captured or are being caught infiltrating Xivu's territory. Either possibility indicates the dynamic for our engagements against these Hive, and what primarily will change about it. For an example of what I mean, you need to only look at Savathun's throne world and the on-ground combat that one can witness. When Guardians arrived on the throne world's shores, we decided to engage with the forces there, and as a result, created a three-way conflict for the fate of the territory. The real victor in such a war is nobody. There is no one who is able to adequately hold such ground. Every single faction has lost and gained something. The Guardians of Earth have achieved tactical objectives such as the elimination of enemy commanders, but lack the sufficient numerical advantage to hold the territory with any degree of surety. The Scorn have made significant headway into the throne world and hold bastions of a more darkness-infested nature in regions to the hypothetical west of the map. including the Sunken Pyramid, the Disciples' Bog, and the Miasma. However, Guardian operations and Lucent Hive Inquisitors have made their grasp on such territory loose at best, and their command structure has been decimated with the death of Rolk and the destruction of many Scorn higher-ups. As for the Lucent Hive, whilst they still hold the major strongholds and points of importance within the throne world, there is undoubtedly a degree to which they've been battered by assaults on all sides. The death of Savathûn, the foiling of Imaru's plans to create additional weapons for the Lucent Hive, and the repeated attacks on all fronts have undoubtedly left them in a precarious position. They even have trouble holding the Wellspring from the Guardians. With Guardian fireteams and Scorn militia making perfect guerrilla fighters in the Throne World territory, it's also not hard to imagine that the Lucent Hive can't necessarily hold the territory at their borders with any degree of surety. I can only imagine that the attrition and loss of strategic assets in Descendant Hive would be comparable if one were to look at the losses that would occur if Savathûn and Xivu Arath's forces came to fight in Xivu Arath's territory. And I would remind you that those losses are more pronounced for Xivu Arath, because if Savathûn's forces were to arrive, they would include Lucent Hive, Hive Guardians. Hive Guardians that, as stated, are perfect guerrilla fighters within the environment of a throne world. The Guardians are now also doggedly pursuing the Lucent Hive and the Hive of Xivu Arath's brood with the assistance of their coalition allies, particularly those of the Cabal Ascendancy. If Earth's Guardians were to drop into such a conflict, it would be yet another three-way conflict, and it feels more and more likely that this is going to happen as time goes on. But most crucially of all, the Hive of Xivu Arath are not the Scorn. Fighting against Guardians of both flavors would undoubtedly be costly, and would be something that would set them back more than the other factions. Whilst Guardians can make hit-and-run assaults, they would have to stand and fight, and would watch plentiful forces being whittled down to nothing. This is the kind of position that Xivu and her Hive would find themselves in, and it's one that has been drawn as a schism thanks to the Hive and their choices within the Lucent Brood. The overall point of what I'm trying to explain here today as a whole is simply this. In spite of the brave face that they're putting on, and despite of their torturous rituals that they are conducting upon Lucent Hive, the position of Xivu Arath's swarm has fundamentally changed, and now, for the first time in billions of years, they can contemplate the possibility of change, and can see how actively it can affect them right before their eyes. They can be put in jeopardy by the choices of their brothers and sisters within the Lucent Brood, and will have to face them on the battlefield, knowing that the strength that they believed of the darkness might not be as strong as they think. Does this idea anger them or frighten them? That is the only question I have, because from it, I believe, the rest of the answers flow. That's all from me for now though. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you want to leave your own thoughts down below, leave them in the comments section. And if you have any other thoughts, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Per audacia ad astra. I'll see you, Starside.